Always News Now Sports has your all-access pass to all things Hawkeyes. This is Eye on the Hawks.
I'd say it won't be cold up here, up there. Last time I was up there, it was like 17 degrees. And my mom said she was shoveling her seat so she could sit down, so she didn't sit on ice. But yeah, this might be the best weather in Minnesota I've ever had.
It was -1 that day at now Huntington Bank Stadium in Minneapolis when Iowa and Jack Campbell, who did not step out of bounds, got out of there with Floyd in a win against the Gophers. Welcome to Floyd of Rosedale week here on Eye on the Hawks. Mitch Vick, Owen Sebring, Mike Howell here. Thanks to everybody who's been tuning in, of course. If you're watching on YouTube, we're about to turn back time. We're going to go way back Wednesday before Throwback Thursday. A lot of fun Floyd of Rosedale battles to reminisce about. Of course, you can follow us at Eye on the Hawks on Twitter. I think we're at 670 followers now. It'd be awesome to get to 700 even there by the time we get to October. Yeah, absolutely. Iowa's News Now YouTube channel and Instagram for all these clips. And certainly if you're on the YouTube channel right now, you're watching the podcast live, seeing all these interviews and videos and everything like that. This is one of the big ones, as Kirk Ferentz pointed out on Tuesday as we talked to him at his presser. And you know Kirk, he loves his history lessons. And so right away on Tuesday, he started getting asked about the history of this, dated back to '81 when he got back to be the O-line coach. And you heard quite a bit from Kirk Ferentz about the history of the battle for the Floyd of Rosedale.
Yeah, we typically do. Just because, like 1981, I had no idea. I was telling somebody yesterday when I got here in '81, like Johnny Carson was on TV, and he was funny. Like, he was really funny in a good way, you know? I mean, I thought it was pretty funny. So anyway, I remember on his show, whatever, there was a feature about Iowa and Minnesota, and I didn't even know Iowa was at that point. So it was like pre-1981. But I do remember, it's like, you know, there was a real rivalry. And when I got here in '81, there was. But I was kind of naive to it until they came across the field after the 12-10 win out there. 1981, yeah, and I thought, boy, they're pretty enthusiastic about shaking hands, and then I dumbbell, they wanted to come get the trophy, which was right behind us. So that was my introduction to the trophy game, and you know, once you're here for a little bit, you figure it out real quickly and what it means. I think for this particular one, there's a real deep history, certainly, you know, so yeah, we'll do that. Give the guys a chance, and yeah, we haven't seen the pig in a while, so, you know, we'll have pictures and all that and see if we can do something about it, but just that never seems to come easy. I remember going up there in '82 after we got beaten 81, 12-10. That was one of the most physical games I can ever remember being involved with. Maybe it was just me, but that's how it felt. It was a really hard-fought game, and both teams really went at it, and we were able to come out victorious. So, but I remember that being it was back in the old dome. You know, tough ball game.
Yeah, the old Metrodome, and we'll revisit the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome here in a little bit, but the 118th meeting between Iowa and Minnesota coming up this week, and of course the Floyd of Rosedale named for former Minnesota Governor Floyd Olson, and yeah, what a legacy to leave if you're a gubernatorial entity there.
And the pig is from my hometown,
That's true.
Fort Dodge, a farm near there, the Rosedale Farms, and they've actually got, and I should have looked up a photo, I could probably find one. There is a water park that was like 10 years old. It's called the Rosedale Rapids, and they have a giant pig right in front of it.
Yeah.
And it's honor to Floyd.
Yeah.
So been there a few times. It's about 10, 15 years old. So.
And depending on which way you take from eastern Iowa to Minneapolis, there is a Floyd, Iowa that you drive through.
Oh, that's true, right?
You got the water tower right there by Charles City. Yeah, that's always a fun one. And I remember 2 years ago driving up there with my dad, and we weren't rolling down the windows for pictures or anything, but I got a shot of that Floyd water tower and then sat in that -1 degree wind chill up in the stands. What a fun one. And again, that was a big talking point yesterday with all these guys. Just like, yeah, do you remember 2 years ago? I mean, you guys won, but how cold was it?
Still talking about it.
That was chilly.
I think that Floyd in Fort Dodge is even younger than that, Mike. I just remember when I was in Sioux City, I drove to state softball one time, and the route it took me was, oh, there's a pig here now. I thought that was only like 2019 or 20. It was built, I thought.
No, it's at least 2015, 2016.
Oh, really?
The pig might be newer. The water park I was talking about.
Oh, sure. Okay,
about 10 years old.
Yeah.
And the water park is the Rosedale Rapids. And this is from actually someone I went to high school with, Mike Ott. So shout out to Mike. He took this photo and replied to some history lessons about Floyd. And that's interesting story if you look back on how that started. It all started because Ozzie Simmons back in '34 up in Minneapolis was getting beat up. He's one of the few black players back then by many Minnesota players. And basically the governor said, hey, Iowa fans, if that happens here, they're going to come on the field essentially and make sure that doesn't happen again. And then the AG of Minnesota got mad and said, you know, you guys are inciting a riot. And then to cool things off, they're like, let's do a wager about a pig. They had like
livestock involved.
yeah. Interesting
take
story.
the temperature down a little bit.
It is, again, we're biased because we're right in the thick of it, but in all these college football rivalries, and everyone's got trophy games and so much lore there, but like, it's just such a unique, you know, how often do politics roll into college football rivalries, especially back then? It's such an interesting story, and talks, again, you're about to trot out for the 118th time, just what is involved with all this stuff and what goes to build everything towards it.
I think Scott Docterman at one point yesterday called it the greatest traveling trophy in college sports, and I'm like, maybe. I think he said the greatest traveling football trophy, and I said, have you seen the battle for Zeus between City High and Liberty? That trophy rules.
The best ones are definitely Big Ten related, though.
For sure.
Minnesota has probably
some of the oldest. You know, yeah, Minnesota plays for Paul Bunyan's Axe, which I believe Minnesota, Wisconsin it's either the oldest trophy game or the oldest trophy, either oldest rivalry or oldest trophy. I can't remember which one. Little Brown Jug, Minnesota and Michigan's up there.
There's another one
Paul Bunyan between Michigan and Michigan State as well.
It's Minnesota related. It's like St. Cloud State and Minnesota State Mankato. It's like a what do you call it? A trainer's box. You know, whatever you call that. That's I think that has some sort of distinction as being like the oldest one or something.
So this quick Google search I had showed that the Little Brown Jug was in 1899.
Yeah.
Really?
And that's one of those that I remember Minnesota won that in maybe 05, and I don't know if they've won it since. Maybe I'm misspeaking there, but I remember that being a huge deal growing up in a household with a dad that was a big Minnesota fan. When Minnesota won the Jug, that was a big deal. Minnesota-Wisconsin is the most played rivalry in FBS, 133 meetings, so they're getting ready for 134 this year.
Which one's Little Brown Jug? Is that Minnesota, Michigan?
Yeah, Minnesota, Michigan.
I was thinking about the picture of Jared Ellerson, receiver from Minnesota, walking off and just giddy about it.
They last won the Jug in 2014.
They did win in 2014.
And in 2005, apparently, according to Winsipedia.
Yeah.
But before then, it was in
I
86.
thought there was one in there. Yeah, in 2014 they win Floyd and the Little Brown Jug. That was a heck of a year for the Gophers.
I was just thinking about that with Cade McNamara yesterday. That he's been part of a lot of rivalries in Minnesota.
When you think about the kids from Ohio that are on this team and have been throughout the years, you know, they grow up in the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. Anybody who's from, you know, the Detroit area who comes in, they've grown up on the other side of that rivalry. It's just, you know, wherever you go, there's some history there. We've got a bunch of these old videos that we cut up today. What's everybody's favorite Floyd of Rosedale, Iowa, Minnesota game memory, anything like that? I know Mike's got a few in there.
Yeah. Mike, I'll let you go ahead.
I'll go first, and this is just because I got kind of lucky being a Hawkeye fan growing up. I liked the Packers first. I started watching the NFL like in 1998-ish, and I didn't get into college until 2001 when the Iowa beat Texas Tech in the Alamo Bowl. The next year I was super pumped, and so I started. My first full season was 2002, and that's, you know.
Good investment.
I'm going with that. We got some video from this at the Dome. Brad Banks.
Shout out to Andy Garman, who was the sports director here at the time, and whoever else was running the camera, because they were. I posted this today. So obviously, if you remember, Minnesota or Iowa clinches an undefeated Big Ten record and a Big Ten conference title in this game, the win at the Dome. The idea in 2024 of local TV cameras being allowed into the locker room is beyond us. Our cameras were in the Iowa locker room after this game, and Kirk for like Kirk's post-game speech to the players, everything like that is really, really cool. If you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing the goalpost get taken off. One of the most iconic memories and events and moments.
Is that a Bills jacket?
Football. Yeah, somebody's in there with like a Giants or Bills jacket. You could also see the Iowa Reebok jersey and the Iowa Reebok pullover in there. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff aging this video if you're watching on YouTube. But
bucket hats.
To hear, and Clinton Solomon, I believe, on this catch, number 3, Clinton Solomon.
Mo Brown, right? Oh, no, he's 9.
That's Clinton Solomon, yeah. Mo Brown had one earlier in these highlights. But yeah, to hear Kirk talk to his players 22 years later after after that, there's Jim Delaney there in the video handing over the trophy in the locker room. Just a really, really cool thing. But yeah, that was, a moment that in a lot of ways, Hawkeye fans have been hoping for again for more than 2 decades.
Yeah. Boy, I guess there's nothing stopping us from asking to go in the locker room. We can see if Matt Weitzel will let us get in there after one of these games.
I was thinking about the only time, if you're watching on YouTube, you're watching some 2008 highlights now, 55-0. This was the last game in the Metrodome, and sorry to the Maroon and Gold for that one. Not a lot of Golden Gopher first downs in that one, but I was thinking about the only time I've covered a Big Ten championship game and covered the winner was 15 when I was still covering Michigan State. We got to do interviews on the field with everybody, but I don't have any memory of going into the locker room. Amari Spivey, Owen, if you're watching on YouTube, Owen started a video earlier this week with Amari Spivey, and
Iowa Central's finest.
First pick six in the long string of 17 straight seasons with pick six now because of that Amari.
So I put this one as my second favorite. This is my freshman year in college. We were going to go up to this, but me and my friends were broke and we didn't have any money, so we couldn't go. We ended up watching it in Fort Dodge at my friend's house, 55-0. I think everyone thought we were going to win, but that was kind of just more than we thought, that kind of blowout win. So that was a pretty cool moment.
Really awesome.
Cap off a good season.
As a kid who was raised in the Minnesota side of the rivalry, but was a student at Iowa at the time, I remember that being the game of yeah, I'm probably going to start rooting for my school now. Maybe that was a little fair weather, but I distinctly remember being Iowa fans seem to have a really good time, win or lose. Yeah. Minnesota fans just have this kind of oh, here we go again. We've talked about just how tough it is to win consistently with that program, and now it's kind of happening. But I remember that game too, being just yeah, this is my school. I'm probably going to hitch my wagon to that.
Well, along those same lines, are you finished wrapping up?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, again, not a Hawkeye fan. I mean, I was raised by 2 Colorado State alums, so always been kind of on both sides of the coin. So I don't really have much for an Iowa-Minnesota rivalry memory. But I did ask my good friend Luke Hawthorne about this because he's been a longtime Hawkeye fan, about our same age, about what his favorite memory was. And he points to the 2019 game. He had his whole family there, and he said, I remember it's the only time I remember Minnesota being really good. They were undefeated, but Iowa defense bullied them at the end of the game. Tanner Morgan got hurt when A.J. Epinesa sacked him with 40 seconds left. He was in the north end zone, and he was the first time there in the north, and just remembers hearing how crazy loud it went at that time. He said he remembers Minnesota fans throughout the whole game had a look on their face just like they knew they were going to lose and their dreams were about to end. Even at the beginning of the game, they looked nervous. I was just playing with not much to lose back then.
I remember the week before was Minnesota beating Penn State at home. And again, this is 5 years ago, so it's not that long, but Minnesota had Tanner Morgan, who had a great season, but Rashad Bateman was a receiver on that team. Tyler Johnson was a receiver on that team. Rodney Smith, I believe, was still a running back. And I think Mo Ibrahim ended up playing was maybe not getting a ton of playing time because Rodney Smith was healthy, and they had another running back that was healthy as well. But I remember the sentiment in TCF Bank Stadium that day, now Huntington Bank Stadium, was just Minnesota doesn't win games like this. They don't, when it's the top tier teams, even if things are going well. People still talk about in 2003, Minnesota playing Michigan. They were up 28-7 going into the fourth quarter, and John Navarre and the Wolverines came back and won. Minnesota ran for 424 yards that game. It was Asad Abdul-Khalik, Thomas Taipei was fullback, Lawrence Maroney and Marion Barber III in that backfield. But it was just that sentiment of we never win these big games. We never. And I think it was Jordan Howden had the game-clinching interception against Penn State in 19. And it was that relief of oh my gosh, we won it. We won a big time game against a top 5 team. But the sentiment you just talked about of Minnesota fans then coming to Iowa and be well, we're back at Kinnick, and yeah, we can't have too much. And again, that was an 11-2 win season or 11-2 season for Minnesota. They don't win double-digit games. They've had two seasons in this century, 2003 and 2019, where they've won double-digit games.
So did that loss to Iowa keep them out of the Rose Bowl?
That's a good question.
They won on the next week. They won on the road against Northwestern and then lost at home to Wisconsin 38-17. So they finished 10-2 regular season.
So that was their first loss of the year then, was to Iowa.
Yeah, they came in, what would have been, 8-0. Yeah. I mean, that was a great Gopher team.
That's a good Gopher team, and they played in the Outback Bowl. That's kind of the Big Ten must be kind of strong.
Against Auburn, and looked great in that game. But
Yeah, they beat
that's as good as a Golden Gopher team as there's been this century.
I've got an honorable mention game that I wanted to bring up before we get to yours, Mitch. And it was 2009. The game was kind of boring, so I didn't want to put it up there. It was 12-0. Iowa handled the game, but there was not a lot of scoring. But that was like the last game, I believe, of the season after that Ohio State loss, if I'm not.
It was James Vandenberg's second career start because he had gone into Columbus and kid played great. But yeah, it was at 12. I looked it up. Pat Anger had 16 tackles against the Gophers.
So we clinched. Well, we didn't clinch officially, but everyone figured we clinched a BCS Bowl. And I think at the time, me and my friends thought we were going to the Fiesta Bowl.
There were a ton of Fiesta Bowl reps.
I snuck a couple bags and we were throwing chips in the air at the end of the game. So we ended up going to the Orange Bowl, beat Georgia Tech. So that was a great memory, but just a fun memory I wanted to bring out.
That was a super fun one, yeah, because there wasn't a lot of scoring, but it was just like, okay, let's
it was cold that day,
too. It was a cold game, too.
Were your Jinko jeans with big pockets? Get those,
we had the bibs.
The Coral Ridge buckle, yeah. Probably
you could fit a lot in that. I'm not going to say what else I fit in there, but you could fit some stuff in those
that you can
leggings.
now purchase legally, I imagine, inside the walls
Perhaps.
of the stadium. Perhaps. Who's to say? We've got one more set of highlights. 2015, again, a couple weeks after the Minnesota game that year, I was covering the other team in the 2015 Big Ten Championship game, but I was back as a fan. I don't know if you're watching on YouTube, you see the all-black alternates. Do you remember, Mike, they announced these in like late August with Chris Ruth and the video production team that have really laid the groundwork for what Caleb Saunders and Justin Elsner and the crew are doing right now. It was Rick Ross's 100 Black Coffins, and it was just a teaser video. And people this was before they had beat Illinois State to open the season. There was no inkling that they were going to go 12-0, but it was also like, hey, when they play Minnesota, they're going to wear those all-black uniforms, the alternates, with the big Tiger Hawk logo and the A&F on the back. And I just remember that being hyped. And I was back from Michigan for this game. It was one of the last times I saw Bob Brooks, and we shared a really cool moment in the post game with him.
How'd you get on the sideline?
How did you get those bibs in?
That's a good point.
I probably had a press pass of some kind, and
sure.
I documented some stuff. But I was with Jordan Loperino, former KORI sports director, who's probably listening to this. Shout out Jordan. And it was just cool to be alumni back for that game. We were both in the media working, so we were kind of covering it for our own devices. But I will always remember that game because, again, that was a night game against Minnesota. We're getting that this weekend. We don't get a lot of those against the Gophers. And just to go 10-0, the kid I've known for a long time in Austin Blythe carrying off Floyd of Rosedale from Williamsburg. Just like one of those quintessential perfect coming back to your alma mater nights. And that was a fun one for sure.
Top three alternate uniform, those all blacks with the yellow.
They just, Iowa had worn, the throwbacks before. They'd had like the military kind of alternate. I think it was in 2011 or 2012 against Purdue with the silver helmets.
Mm-hmm.
But people had been clamoring for years, like, give us an all black alternate. I think maybe some people even talked like, why don't you make the Tiger Hawk a little bigger? And so again, I think it was August 28th. I looked it up, that video came out to tease those. And that was, until Iowa started becoming a top 5 and possible playoff team, that was a big talking point. They're going to have all black alternates. That's going to be awesome. And I still remember just Kinnick being electric that night. Not because, it's usually electric because of the other team coming in and a chance for an upset. This was a fan base that was just absolutely ecstatic about where the program was. And again, it turned into a magical year.
Some fan options in the comments. 2003, when Marion Barber and Lawrence Maroney came in, and Iowa won 40-20. I think Ed Hinkle had a game that day.
I remember the Eddie. I think that was that 03? I don't think it was 03.
40-20 was. I just looked up Wikipedia. I thought I think the 4 touchdowns might have been 04.
I think that was 04 or 05.
40-22. Minnesota was ranked number 19 in 2003, and Iowa beat them by 18 in Kinnick.
The Ed Hinkle game, Saturday, November 19th, 2005. Yeah,
so
I remember that.
That one was off. I was off on that, but
that was a wild one. That was a wild one. So if you're in the comments, keep sharing those memories because everybody's got their own. We're excited to see what the atmosphere is like up there coming up this weekend. And a lot of go ahead.
I was just going to say, and we mentioned as we were talking about the dates of that game, is that a good time to bring this up?
Yeah, we can.
I don't know why I even bothered looking this up, but I was just kind of looking through the rundown of Boy, I know this is always like a kind of a fall game. It's always like October, bordering on November. It's been a lot of late season games, of course, chilly ones. But this is now, to my surprise, in 118 meetings, the earliest the game has ever been played. Only 2 other times it's been in September, the 28th and 29th. They played it in 2012 and 13. But Saturday's game will be their earliest in 118 years that they'll played Iowa, Minnesota together.
When was the 2012? I was at the 2012 game. That was the Jordan Cotton flea flicker game.
29th of September.
Yeah, I remember being back for that because it was either it was a couple weeks removed from the Central Michigan loss at home, so I think people were already kind of like, okay, like what's this team going to be? And Floyd beating Minnesota and getting Floyd's always good for Ward Elzea. So I do remember. I distinctly remember being shook by the fact that Iowa ran a flea flicker in the middle of a game, and cool little moment there. Of course, so much talk, even yesterday to players almost a year removed, of controversial endings and whatnot, and what an arm means when trying to field a punt, things like that. So naturally, a lot of questions to players about that, and they say they're not trying to win this one for Coop, so to speak.
Yeah, we left last year with a bad taste in our mouth. Can't change the call, can't do anything, not going to get that game back. They probably don't feel bad for us either. So, but we know it's all about this year and how we respond this year. And I think we're most focused on winning this game this year.
Yeah, Jay, I mean, you think about every time you go up there, something controversial happens. Whether it's
like Campbell's
thing, or even in COVID, you had, we'll leave the timeouts and take Floyd with us at the end of the game from Kirk. What is it about this series that just seems to poke the bear?
It's just Big Ten football at its finest. I think it's fun. You have two good teams that play physical football, and it's usually the games are cold, so it's like the best of the Midwest, and I think you have two teams that are playing for a trophy, excited to play each other. Obviously the game goes back to a long time, and two teams that are excited to play each other. I think that's what you'll see on Saturday.
You've got Iowa obviously next door to Nebraska, and that's a fairly new conference rivalry. You got Illinois next door. You got Wisconsin to the northeast, but it does feel like, just in terms of animosity, Iowa, Minnesota does feel like, even if people don't list it as a quote-unquote the best rivalry, the top rivalry, the most important rivalry, it always feels like, I mean, you mention Iowa, Minnesota, and one of the first things that a lot of fans will think of is the other fan base and how they are or are not treated. I don't know what you guys think of that, especially being a North Iowa kid. I don't know if you've felt like, and I don't know if it's because you've got more people like graduating from Iowa and then maybe getting jobs in Minneapolis and getting jobs in Madison or Champaign or Lincoln or something like that. It just feels like there's a little more passion when it comes to Iowa, Minnesota, at least in the fan base.
Definitely, and I don't think each fan base would even point and say that's our biggest rival, but Minnesota fans do have that "who hates Iowa, we hate Iowa" when every other game.
Yeah,
but
that seems to be a stickler.
They'd still say Wisconsin is the team they'd want to beat the most, I think.
Yeah.
And when you go to Iowa, I think Nebraska and Iowa State are the two teams that you'd put at the top almost, even though Nebraska's kind of newer. I am from northern half of Iowa, but there's a lot of Cyclones, so that's my first rivalry was that, because there's so many people that you're living with. The Vikings are like the number one team in town, it seems like. So a lot of people do go to Minneapolis for that. But each Floyd week, there's I think the fan bases, when you go there, I've been there for tailgate a couple times, I get almost the most hate at Minnesota.
Yeah. Really?
Anywhere else in the Big Ten. I mean, Iowa State might be comparable just because that rivalry is so kind of heated too. But yeah, that one's definitely, I think, the Big Ten team. When you go to Wisconsin, I feel like it's more mutual, like, okay, you guys are one of the Western side programs that are good. But it seems like there is a lot of hate.
There's just an intensity to it. And maybe it's because I've been to more Iowa-Minnesota games than any other matchup between two teams of any other college football rivalry or anything like that. But it just, I don't know, your experience covering those games too, or just growing up in Iowa and working in Minnesota for a while, it's just a different level of spite between fan bases, it feels like.
Yeah, the neighboring states is always a big thing, but you say the neighboring states, but it's not like Iowa, Illinois really means all that much in terms of a rivalry. They want to win that game, but it's not to the level of what Nebraska is. The interesting thing I was looking up about the Minnesota team and the Iowa team is it's incredible for being again, just neighbors to the north. Iowa only has one Minnesota kid on the roster. That's YA Black. Yeah. Minnesota, they have 2 Iowans on their roster. Frank Bierman, local kid apparently.
Tipton, yeah.
Tipton, very good.
And he was a JUCO kid, a tight end, I believe. Still.
Iowa Western, yep, tight end. And then Jacob Simpson, another tight end coming out of Iowa. It might surprise
ours.
you.
Those are
Jacob Simpson, who came from Johnston, Iowa. But just there's always so much crossover with like Iowa recruiting kids from Illinois or Wisconsin or Nebraska or Missouri. But Minnesota, for some reason, like all those kids are either gravitating towards the Gophers, or a lot of kids in Minnesota go to North Dakota State, South Dakota State, I'm sure too. But still, there's maybe that animosity runs that deep where if you're a Minnesota kid, like Iowa's still a little bit lower on the chart of schools you're going to want to go to.
Minnesota a couple years ago had Coke Heath. I believe that's his name.
Sioux
He was a Sioux Center kid who was kind of an H-back, and last I checked was still in the NFL. I think he went to the Bucks. Yeah. And then they had, why am I just blanking on the name now? They had somebody else from, Logan Jones was telling me yesterday his first offer was Minnesota.
Okay.
As a D lineman.
I wondered if there was if they recruit a lot of the same players, but that's kind of shocking that only, there are not a lot of players that are from the opposite state on the rosters.
Yeah, I don't know if historically that holds true as well, but it surprised me both of the last 2 years that YA Black's been the only Minnesota kid on the roster between those two teams.
Yeah, it feels like maybe, you've got the recruiting pocket in Illinois, Michigan, kind of the Detroit area. Those are, kind of pipelines for Iowa, pipelines for a lot of Midwest programs, I imagine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does feel like more and more like you're not getting a ton of Nebraska guys come to Iowa. I believe there's 1 or 2. I'm blanking on who's from Nebraska and on the Iowa roster. There's somebody or has been in the recent.
I'm just thinking of Ben Bramer. He's from Pierce and went to Iowa State, but probably got to be a few Omaha kids.
There's just there's a few.
I know some
fewer and fewer kids crossing the
Nebraska
border there.
poaches Iowa kids a lot too.
Sure.
I mean, a
Over
lot
on
of
the
kids,
west side,
especially from the west side of the state, end up
Will Hubert,
over there.
Will Hubert, that's what I was thinking.
Peeper,
Peeper, sure.
Yeah, duh. That's what I was thinking of.
Michael Burt, freshman, and then that's
Burt
it.
got mentioned the other
really?
day as a guy who Coach Hodge talked about Michael Burt maybe being in the mix this year even, and I believe he's a true freshman.
We actually asked YA Black yesterday. I kind of asked, like, he grew up in Marshall, Minnesota, which is like down where Southwest Minnesota State is. So
when you said you grew up in Mustang country, I'm like, what are you talking about? Oh yeah, Southwest Minnesota State.
D2 deep down there. But I asked, like, did you go to any Gopher games, or you go to any Floyd of Rosedale games? And he said the first college football game he ever went to was when he was a recruit for Iowa. He went to, was it 2019?
2019, Iowa Penn State. Yeah.
That's a good transition to this segment that I put in a rundown.
This is a really good idea for Mike. Yeah.
Might get a little repetitive because I didn't include that, but I was listening to the interviews from the players last night, and YA is like super interesting. And if you hear from the, Kirk, I think said on one of the interviews that, I didn't even know if he liked it the first 3 years, and he just kind of talked about how he's become a vocal leader and how he's grown and stuff. And I just thought it'd go cool to do like kind of a Hawkeye highlight, and I clipped like about 3 minutes of sound from YA just going through his journey, talking about his first game, and responding to that, to what Kirk said about him not liking it, because he kind of says like, yeah, that makes sense, but this is our Hawk highlight for the week, and it's YA Black. I'll just toss it to his soundbite.
What's kind of been the process of becoming a more vocal leader over these last few years?
Getting out of my comfort zone. I mean, I've had plenty of guys, Joe Evans, Logan Lee, Noah Shannon, like they've really gotten me out of my comfort zone, and now I'm that guy that's got to step up with Deontay Craig and Ethan Hurkett. So, it's pretty cool to see yourself grow.
I know you were raised more in Mustang territory, but so I don't know how big of a Gopher fan you were growing up. Or did you go to any Iowa, Minnesota games? Were you present in any?
No, be honest with you, the first ever college football game I went to was the Penn State game, and it was gold out here. What? 2019? 2019?
With the yellow uniform.
Yep. That was the first ever college football game, and that was
on a visit.
Was on a visit, and that was the craziest experience. Me and my family, we're really hyped for that one.
Kirk Ferentz was saying upstairs, he said, for 3 years I didn't even know if YA liked it here. And he said you were just so quiet.
That is
what's your
very
reaction to that?
He's not wrong. I mean, I did get whooped every day for like 2 years by Lindy, so I wouldn't vocalize it, but football was very difficult.
I wasn't a very social person, and Chauncey Golston came back and was at a game, and he was like, "You talk? Like you actually like talk to people?" So, I mean, it's just part of being here. You're gonna grow as a person.
So you do like it here?
Oh yeah, love it here. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
So the part of the leadership that we've talked about a little bit. One other thing that I noticed in the mic'd up video is that you were going out of your way to talk to the young guys, teach them things like Maddox or even some of the walk-ons. Like, is that important to you in terms of leadership?
100%. After being here for a while, you learn that like it's great to help people. Like it's like leaving the jersey in a better place is like it's really important because these are the guys that are next, and I would love to see this program to continue. So, to help the young guys and like give them words of advice. Hopefully they can use it and give it to the next person.
Among those young guys that you're seeing now, grooming, et cetera, like, do you see anyone jump out that you see as that could be a potential monster to replace just
all of them? I mean, I look at Chima Chineke. He has the longest arms ever. It's insane. And then there's Joe. Put a little weight on him. He can put some work in. Devin Kennedy. AKA Unk. If anybody wants to put that out there, his name is Unk because he dresses like an uncle. He doesn't like it, but like he thinks it's funny. So now he has a shot. I'm telling you, he's got it. He's got a little unk in him.
So when you say dresses like an uncle, what do you mean exactly?
I'm talking. He comes in a polo and some khakis to meetings, and we love it. We always acknowledge it. He's cool.
For the record, Devin Kennedy is 18 years old, but we will call him Unk every chance we get to see him now. This is what's great about it, and I'm glad Mike told us last night he had kind of thrown this together, this Hawkeye highlight thing. We do, and we share a lot of these interviews, or most of them I think on Tuesdays on the YouTube channel if you want to hear from everybody, but just taking time to hear from the guys that maybe you don't always make it into the sound bites in the newscast or even on the podcast. I think taking time, especially a guy like Yahya Black, we were talking last year, got to talk to him a couple times. He's immensely thoughtful, takes his time answering questions, but last year even and a couple times yesterday, won't give you a ton. I'll give you just a short answer, but yesterday to see him,
come out of his shell.
Sounds like what he's been doing on the field too, of becoming more vocal, sharing, having some laughs and having a good time. Just strikes as as good a dude as you could want on that team. And as I posted a bite yesterday from Logan, having to go up against him in practices, he's 6'6", 340. Like, not only is he a big guy, but he's a great guy. And as Logan said, like, where else, anywhere, am I going to go up against a 6'6", 340 guy? So he's making me better. Hope I'm doing the same. But he just, when you point to a guy who's a leader, who's found his voice, so to speak, as a leader, literally and figuratively, you can't ask for much more than 94 from Marshall, Minnesota.
Yeah. I think you can always relate to your growth in college. When you're 18, you're scared on a college campus. I shouldn't say scared, but kind of nervous. You're
Small
new.
fish, big pond, yeah.
Like that. And then the funniest bite I thought was like when he's like, Chauncey Golston was like, you can talk? Like when he came back and visited, it's like, I remember my college, I was nervous at 18, but like junior, senior year, you kind of grow into your own and you kind of, become who you're going to be as a person. So that's cool to kind of see that. And on the field, he might not get a lot of play because he's taking double teams. I think Herkett, mentioned that last week, or maybe it was Brian Allen, I can't remember which one, but he's taken that double team so those other defensive linemen can make plays. Still has 9 tackles, 2.5 for loss this season, so he's still making a big impact.
Yeah, he's such a large presence out there. I mean, he just fills up so much space, and a guy who I have to imagine is maybe not an early round, but could be a mid-round draft pick come this time next spring. If he leaves, he's probably got a year left. Yeah,
he's a senior for. I'm not sure if he has a COVID year.
I know Jack Leto was asking him and some other guys yesterday from KCRG just about, defensive tackle is a position where your numbers don't always matter. Yeah. Not a full painting of what you're doing because, again, 9 tackles through 3 games. You think, 3 a game, okay, whatever. But then you'll have games like he had against Wisconsin where Yahya Black makes sure you notice. And
kind of caused that safety.
Brennan Locke maybe still has not so fond memories of meeting Yahya Black in the end zone there.
Yeah, this is his last year. Yeah, he played 14 games in 21.
We'd certainly like to head home, so to speak, to his home state and keep the pig for his senior year there. Let's talk about the Golden Gophers, who are 2-1 heading into Big Ten play. They lost their opener against North Carolina and have not given up a point since. Shutout wins against Rhode Island and Nevada. They are right now kind of a lot like Iowa in some respects, especially if you watch the film. They are not giving up a whole lot scoring. They've got back-to-back shutouts, like we said. Rush defense has been really strong. Again, a good test for this Iowa rush offense that's been doing so well. Really good against the pass, only 112 yards a game given up by that defense. The pass game is in the top half of the nation, or getting close to there at least. Max Brosmer, the New Hampshire transfer, helping that. And then you've got Darius Taylor, who Iowa got to look at last year, a great sophomore back for the Gophers, and Marcus Major, who stepped in that opener against North Carolina that Darius Taylor missed. He's been a nice number 2. And then Daniel Jackson, who opened up last year with that incredible catch against Nebraska, got like one toe on his foot down to get that one. He's leading the way, 12 catches, 156 receiving yards. You'll like this as a Packers fan, Mike. I don't know if you noticed this. Christian Driver, son of Donald, now with the Gophers, had his first career touchdown last week.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Lecky Brockington's back as well as a receiver. They've got some guys.
They've got some depth at running back too. That Jordan Newman?
Jordan Newman, who was a defensive back who then moved to running back last year, and at least for one game at some point.
Yeah.
Ran for I think almost had like a 200-yard game, something like that. It was wild. It's Minnesota. Minnesota and Iowa are way more similar than I think Minnesota fans and Iowa fans would want to admit, just because their coaches have immensely different personalities. But that Minnesota team is trying to do exactly what Iowa wants to do, which is control the line of scrimmage, get that time of possession. They're very, very similar teams. And the defense, if you watch the Gopher defense, very opportunistic on defense, and they've made some big plays so far this year.
Minnesota and Iowa's states are more similar than what
exactly.
I think Minnesotans would like to admit. I feel like the year that I worked in Mankato, I feel like Minnesota has kind of an air of superiority. They turn up their nose at the state of Iowa overall. They feel like they're a little bit elitist towards
100%. I mean, it's not even a question.
Mike has thoughts.
Yeah, I worked in a KIMT, which is a half Minnesota, half Iowa TV market, and a lot of people from Rochester, Minnesota. And I mean, I worked with great people. They're mostly from like the St. Cloud area and the Twin Cities, but the Twin Cities gives them that like, well, there's nothing in Iowa, but at least we have the cities, kind of deal. And which is true, but at the same time, it's like, man, they are very cocky about their state.
Yeah, and whenever I was in Mankato and people would make comments like that, I'm like, Mankato may as well be Iowa. Like, southern Minnesota is just Iowa. Just because you guys have the Twin Cities an hour and a half away, like, that's all you're hanging your hat on as a state at this point.
Yeah, Rochester's a nice town.
Is it?
So, yeah, it is.
I love Minneapolis. Is a fantastic city.
Oh, sure.
So is Cedar Rapids. So is Iowa City.
Yeah.
So is Des Moines.
Every city is its own thing. You don't have to.
You say so.
We don't have to rank them, guys. Just let them be what they are. We've got a bunch of KGAN alumni working at Minneapolis stations. Kelly O'Connell, who is the morning anchor, she's at Fox 9 up there. You've got Mace Michaels, former chief meteorologist here. He's basically the meteorologist for the Minnesota Twins. Awesome gig. And he fills in with I think he's filled in at every single station in the market, which is wild for a little inside baseball. To be a freelancer and work at every station in your market is, you don't hear that. You maybe hear contracts every once in a while, someone crossing the street, so to speak, but yeah, it's a rare thing.
Former photographer Jason
Myers at KARE 11.
Yeah, that's right.
Eva Anderson was up there for a while. She's at CBS 3 now in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
This is a very small business, as we learn more and more as we get into it. But yeah, that's always been a nice pipeline from Cedar Rapids to Minneapolis.
I'm curious if you remember from your time at KIMT working up there, I just feel like I really noticed such a difference in how much I feel like there's a huge gap in how much Minnesota and Iowa care about the Gophers, college sports in general, and in high school sports as well. I think that the Vikings and the Twins especially are so huge in the state of Minnesota that the Gophers are very low on the interest sheet.
There's definitely a totem pole, and I think Iowa benefits for that, where Iowa and Iowa State, where they're the kind of the NFL of the state, but the Vikings are the thing, and it's the Gopher fans, there are some that are Gophers first, but I 100% agree with that notion.
How many games does Huntington sell out games?
I would imagine.
I mean,
it'll be packed on Saturday. I know that.
And even high school ball too. I'm just like, I feel like, or high school sports in general, I should say, but I just feel like there's just not nearly as much interest there. Just
high school hockey.
High school hockey is big. You got to give them that. Yeah, biggest state tournament attendance-wise in the country is the Minnesota High School State Hockey Tournament.
Yeah, they love the wrestling up there. Minnesota Gopher wrestling fans are up there. Hockey certainly, the Gopher. I don't know the fan base for the Wild. They had the North Stars back in the day when I was a kid, but I don't know I've been to a Wild game. It was a lot of fun. XL Energy Center or whatever it's called.
Wild's big enough, and when I worked there was right when the Lynx were like a powerhouse in the WNBA. So there were actually a pretty decent number of WNBA fans up there about 10 years ago. I'd say that's probably still the case, that they probably care about the WNBA more than your average WNBA market. Wild. They probably don't like the Wild enough for being a hockey state. Like, they are kind of the hockey state in America, and like they probably don't celebrate the Wild as much as they should.
They've got a really good college program. Men's and women's hockey are great in Minneapolis. And I think the fact that there are so many really, really strong high school programs that, fan base, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but like, you almost get burnt out of like our high school hockey's great. We've got great college program. Oh, we've had an NHL team now again. After your old franchise moves to Dallas, and you've got this other one to come back. But it's fun for Iowa because we've got the Wild's minor league affiliates, essentially. The Iowa Heartlanders are the ECHL affiliate, which feeds into Des Moines and the Iowa Wild, then goes up to Minnesota. So I would like to see, as somebody who's covered hockey, and you've covered hockey a little bit too, it would be great to see a Wild fan base kind of build in Eastern Iowa. And, those Heartlanders games were a ton of fun, and I know they're getting ready for a new season. But, it'd be fun to see the hockey fan base build. If Minnesota and Iowa can come together on anything, let it be Iowa Heartlanders, Iowa Wild, Minnesota Wild hockey.
It's
one hockey thing before, maybe we go back to football, but
no, this is a hockey.
There's a St. Louis Blues and Utah Hockey Club match in Des Moines, or game in Des Moines coming up,
awesome.
Which is kind of weird.
Super cool.
Yeah.
I was just going to add that, like, it's, as much as I talk about the interest in football or college football waning as you go north of the border, it's exact same with interest in hockey. When you go, I mean, it's so huge in Minnesota, but as soon as you cross that border, it's just like, people could not care less.
We grew up with junior hockey in Eastern, when the Rough Riders showed up, it was like, and the Blackhawks had been around in Waterloo, and the Dubuque's Fighting Saints came back, but I had no perspective on the difference between junior hockey and AHL hockey until I moved to Grand Rapids, which was during an NHL lockout year, 2012, 2013, and the Griffins were the only game in town. Walked in like, oh, this is professional hockey. For those that don't know, the American League is basically AAA hockey. That was the American League affiliate of the Detroit Red Wings, so half the roster is going to end up in Detroit at some point. Coach Jeff Blashill, who coached against Mark Carlson in the USHL back in the day, he ended up in Detroit. So there's a lot of crossover. I just had no perspective on the levels of hockey, and you've got juniors up in Canada and the OHL and everything like that. But so if Iowans and Minnesotans can come together on hockey, we're going to shave the rough edges off our problems. We might not fix all of them, but we might be finding some common ground. One of the big problems I was trying to work through, and hopefully not seeing it happen in Minneapolis, those big plays, the explosive plays that are becoming a little bit more of a red flag. They seem isolated, but you don't want them to be too much of a habit. Certainly a lot of questions on Tuesday to Coach Ferentz and company about trying to limit those explosive plays against the Gophers.
Yeah, I mean, the other day it looked like one guy was victimized twice. The one was just a mental error, and that to me, I attribute that to being a younger guy and forgetting, first things first, and also forgetting that, the guy across from you is trying to win too, and as a defensive back, you've always got to keep the ball in front of you. It's just paramount. And then the second one was just there's some fuzziness with the communication, and pretty much everything we do offensively, defensively, and special teams involves everybody. Everybody's got to be on the same page, and there's certain leverages or techniques that have to be used, and it may involve more than one guy. And quite frankly, quite typically it does. So that was the second one. And then on the punt return, I mean, it just it looked like junior high coverage. Quite frankly, we had about 17 guys over on this side of those two hashes, and everybody had the wrong leverage, basically. And we'll see. It's the bottom line on all this stuff is we'll see. To your point, they are correctable. So the key thing is, are we going to correct them?
Yeah, we're definitely doing pretty good in the run game. I think at halftime they had like 10 yards or something crazy. think that they didn't even want to tell us what it was at halftime. They just told us to keep playing. But yeah, that's part of our DNA is not giving up big plays. Obviously, we're focused on that this week. We understand Minnesota's got a talented team. They're gonna try to hit some big plays with their receivers. Quarterback's got a big arm like they always do up there. So we understand what we need to work on. But yeah, the big plays, that's what we're focused on, limiting those, and then obviously stopping the run. Starting Big Ten play, if you can't stop the run, it doesn't matter, how many big plays you give up. If they're running the ball for 6+ a play, things aren't gonna be good for us.
We got a question from our guy Hair Trigger. Is this the first question we've had in the season from him?
Yeah, I believe so. And it really ties well into what Jay was just saying. I know the defense. He said the defense is focusing on limiting big plays. Here's one of my questions, not his, but do they give a big play up this week? And then 2, if they're focused on the big play, does that at all take away from the running game? Hair Trigger wants to know, can this Iowa defense hold Minnesota under 100 yards? They've been averaging 130 a game.
Rushing?
Rushing, yes.
I think they can.
Yeah.
Listen, that offensive line is big for the Gophers, per usual. And Brian Callahan is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country, great recruiter too. This defensive line, which a month ago people were like, boy, not a lot of depth, and it sounds like Jeff Bowie's going to be coming back. He's practicing again. He was beat up for a little bit. So that defensive tackle spot could get a little more depth. They've just bottled up everybody. And they did it last year against Darius Taylor and company too, and they kind of had a rotation of backs there. I think Newbin was in a little bit as well. Obviously, you got Marcus Majors a piece now, but right now, until anybody runs against this Iowa front four, I'll take them over anybody right now.
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing a lot of teams get above 100 yards against this Iowa front seven especially. I mean, the defensive line we've seen is so talented. The linebacking core has maybe more experience than any linebacking core in college football history. I mean, what do you have, you've got 16 years of experience between the 3 linebackers?
The active leader in NCAA and career tackles and Nick Jackson, and a guy who just had 171 of them, depending on how you qualified tackles in the bowl game, maybe a couple more according to Owen's eye. In Jay Higgins, you've got 2 dudes who just produce.
Are they all 3 6-year guys?
Kyler, I believe, is as well. He's a 5th or 6th year guy.
Yeah, I mean, these are guys who have been around for a long time. And so that's all just to say that I have a hard time seeing a lot of teams get over 100 yards, and I don't think that Minnesota as a team is going to do it.
Yeah, I think maybe the next game against Ohio State. But I would agree. I don't think Minnesota gets to that marker unless they break off like a fluke, 50-yarder or whatever,
I would be curious to see if Darius Taylor becomes more of a threat in the passing game, though. He took one from Brosmer for an 80-yard touchdown either last week or 2 weeks ago, either against Nevada or Rhode Island.
And this game is kind of interesting because
it will be, yeah.
They're both 2-1. They both played 2 cupcakes. They played 1 Power 4 team, and both lost the game, right? On a field goal.
Missed field goal.
That's true.
Made field goal, yeah.
I kind of think Iowa State's better than UNC right now. I'm not sure. UNC has one of the better running backs in the country, Marion Hampton, and he ran for 124 yards. I guess the other question is, in Minnesota's averaging about 74, giving up 74 yards on defense a game, can Caleb clip that 100-yard mark for the 4th game in a row?
I would think yes.
With a heavy carry load, like 25, 30
maybe
carries?
Something like that. We should point out, we talked about what went wrong on Monday's podcast. LaShawn Williams is out for this game. He was banged up at the end. Sounds like Kamari Moulton, who I thought maybe was the more severely injured of the 2, just given how I watched his arm go and everything like that. Sounds like he's good. He's on the depth chart this week as well. I think, we were kind of wondering if there would be a second back to really rise up and maybe share the load, especially against Troy on Saturday. Obviously, you needed everything you could get from Caleb to really start pulling away there. I think this is the Caleb Johnson offense, and maybe Kamari gets in there for like 5 or 6. Maybe he's taking a swing pass here and there, but I think Caleb Johnson ain't broke. Don't try to fix it.
Yeah, I think that his yardage will maybe not necessarily increase, but I mean, as we get into the Big Ten, his carries are going to increase, and I feel like that could lead to even more yardage for him each game. So assuming he stays healthy, once again, I have a hard time seeing Minnesota be the team that keeps him under 100 yards. Somebody might, somebody probably will, but I don't believe that to be Minnesota.
And back to our rushing defense, I think Minnesota is going to try and, with Brosmer, try and pick apart that secondary. Yeah. You've seen them susceptible on big plays and through other plays against Iowa State and even against Troy. So I think they're going to try and lean on that more so than the rushing game.
I would imagine Jamari ends up on Daniel Jackson. So TJ Hall sounds like he'll still be the starter out there, at least that rotation, whether it's TJ or Deshaun or John Nestor gets out there, them against Lemeki Brockington or Christian Driver, he gets in there a little more, and they've got a couple other pass-catching options. That'll be the big matchup now, because that's what everybody's going to be watching, and you wonder if Minnesota will try to just go right at her, if they think, well, that's what they're expecting, so we're going to try and go after Jamari now, or we're going to really hammer home on the under game, anything like that. It'd be interesting to see those first few drives of who tries to do what.
And Iowa typically doesn't move their corners for receivers. I wonder if this is one of those games where they're going to say Daniel Jackson's the threat. Let's have Jamari shadow him, and then move the other corner on the other side. They typically have that left-right thing going on, and it'll be interesting to see if Minnesota says, okay, we'll keep Daniel Jackson opposite of Jamari the entire game. Just because that makes sense, because you've seen TJ Hall kind of struggle in some parts of the game. Or this season, I should say.
We'll see. It's going to be an interesting one. 6:30 kickoff on NBC as we get into our picks for this week. We got some fun matchups as we start getting into, for the most part, Big Ten play, and we are reminded very quickly in this week's picks, if you're watching on YouTube and we go through these games, that this is a new look Big Ten in 2024. We'll start with the Friday night game between, the Big Ten West, still represented well here in week one of conference play. This is going to be on over on Fox 28, 7 p.m. on Friday. We were just ruining the fact that we don't get to watch this. We'll be out shooting high school football games, but 24th ranked Illinois, 3-0, an 8.5-point underdog heading into Lincoln to go up against undefeated 22nd ranked Nebraska. Big test for the Cornhuskers, who Northern Iowa, Colorado, and who'd they open up against? UTEP.
UTEP. Yep, I was thinking of Colorado.
This is the toughest game for both teams, you could argue. Kansas, a top 25 win for them, but still trying to figure out what Kansas is in the early going. This is a good one. What do we got?
Well, that's a pretty big spread for teams that are only 2 ranking spots apart. I definitely envision Nebraska winning this game, but I could see it being closer than 8 points. So I think I'll take Illinois in this one.
You're taking Illinois. I kind of feel the same way. There's a lot of hype with Nebraska, and I think it's deserved so far this season. But who have they really played? Colorado doesn't have a defense. UTEP and UNI's FCS. This is going to be the first defense that Dylan Raiola is going to have to prove himself at. And I do think they have a good shot at winning, but I don't see that 8.5-point spread. I don't know if he can do it, a 2-score lead on that. So I'm going to take Illinois too.
I'm going to do the same. I wouldn't be shocked if the Illini win this. Luke Altmaier is a veteran guy who's really looked, I think what people wanted out of him in 2023 in Champaign has really started to show that. I wouldn't be shocked if Brett Bielema and company walk out of Lincoln 4-0. But that'll be a fun one, 7 p.m. on Fox 28 on Friday. Staying on Fox 28 at 11 a.m., the big noon game is going to be third-ranked Ohio State hosting Marshall. The Thundering Herd coming in as 39.5-point dogs. Can Will Howard and this offense cover a big spread in Columbus?
Great quarterback name there at Marshall. Stone Earl, their leading passer. They've only played 2 games. Got beat up by Virginia Tech. What did you say the spread is?
39.5.
39.5.
Give me Marshall to keep it within 39.5.
Oh, wow. There was a funny clip going around.
It's such a huge spread. I mean, they lost to Virginia Tech 31-14, kept it respectable. I could see
Virginia Tech lost to Vanderbilt. I'll say that in week 1. There's a funny clip of the head coach. I don't know if you saw this, from Marshall's, trying to tell if any Ohio State players want to come to Marshall next year. You get free biscuits.
The free biscuits. Yeah, I did see that. I did see that.
I think Ohio State will cover. The only issue is if, can they get enough scores before the third quarter before they kind of put their foot off the gas? And I'm going to take them.
Yeah, I'll do the same. I hope some of those kids take advantage of the NIL biscuit offer, because that sounds wonderful. But I'll take the Buckeyes to cover a major spread. From one side of the game to another, Michigan Making a quarterback switch, Alex Orji will be starting for the 18th-ranked Wolverines at home, hosting somehow only 11th-ranked Southern Cal, who are, is that 5.5 or 6.5 favorites? That's over on CBS 2 at 2:30. Mike, we'll start with you. Who do we like here?
Yeah, at first you think USC's got that impressive win against LSU. 5.5 doesn't seem low, or doesn't seem that high. Michigan kind of struggled, obviously, with one of the best teams in the country in Texas. But I'm really not. I'm kind of conflicted because I don't think USC's played, obviously, a defense anywhere close to where Michigan at with Will. What's his name? The big defensive tackle. I'm blanking on Michigan's name, but he's really good. Going to be a top pick in the draft next year. So I went back and forth. I am going to pick USC to cover. I just don't think this Michigan offense is going to do anything to score. And USC can tackle now, so that's I think it's going to be a lower scoring game, but I do think they cover and win by like a touchdown or 10 points.
USC, another team coming off a bye week. A lot of byes in week 3, man. Iowa State was on a bye. There were a lot of byes happening. And boy, this could really be a special USC team, I think. In Michigan, I'm really curious if the teams from last year's national championship game, what caliber of bowl game they get into this year, because they've looked very suspect over the first couple weeks. So I'm going to take USC.
I'm going to take USC as well. I would not be surprised, though, if with Alex Orji out there, much more of a runner than Davis Warren, if Michigan really tries to lean into what they did against Penn State, I think a year or two ago, where they just, and it was Blake Corum, so it was a different setup kind of, but just like run, and just try to keep the ball away from Miller Moss and that USC offense. Because again, it's kind of shocking that they're only 11th, because they are very legitimately looking like one of, if not the best team in the Big Ten. Wouldn't be shocked to see them in Indy in December.
Yep.
Moving on to our second to last game, penultimate game we're picking, and I can't read that. Oh, Northwestern at Washington. I did look up, and there it was. Wildcats heading to Seattle, 10.5-point dogs to a dog, the Huskies, 6 p.m. on FS1. Washington coming off that Apple Cup loss to Washington State.
I mean, we don't have a great gauge for what these teams have to offer. Northwestern, similar to Minnesota, they lost to an ACC team. Their one loss is to Duke. Their other wins are against Eastern Illinois and Miami of Ohio. But I think that Washington has looked like the better team between these two. Northwestern may honestly kind of underwhelm me for what I thought they'd be this year. I thought they could be a team that not contends for a Big Ten title, but at least one of the more respectable teams in the Big Ten. Haven't quite looked at so far. What did you say it is?
10.5.
Yeah, I think I'll still take Washington.
I'm going to do the same. Washington still, despite the setback in the rivalry game, I think that's a decent enough team. Will Rogers, I still have faith in him. And it's going to be tough for these Midwest Big Ten teams to make those West Coast road trips, even if they get a bye afterwards and everything like that. That's a bowl game type trip that you got to make on the fly, and you don't get all the time to settle in there and get your practices and get used to the time changes and all that. It's just different set of variables that you have to deal with a lot quicker than you're used to. So I think Washington will take advantage of that.
Yeah, I want to take Northwestern just to switch it up because we've had some of the same picks. But after they lost the Apple Cup last week, I think they're going to be extra motivated. And this Washington team is still kind of an unknown, just with all the new players they brought in, the new head coach and stuff like that. I just don't think. I think Northwestern is on the bottom end of the Big Ten this year. And so I'm going to go with Washington. Will Rogers just cover that spread at home.
Like it. Then it's, just a couple weeks ago we had the high school version of the Mitch Fick Bowl between Xavier and Williamsburg. Now got the college version of the Mitch Fick Bowl.
There you go. Iowa, 2.5-point favorites on the road against Minnesota, 6:30 on NBC. Floyd is resting in the Twin Cities. Does he make the trip south after Saturday night?
Boy, it really is going to be close. I do think that I like Iowa to cover the 2.5. I think that we've seen enough of their struggles in the first 3 games that I think this is the time when they start to really get things cleaned up. Maybe don't give up those big plays. That's been the only thing that they've really done wrong the first couple games is give up the big plays. So I think that as long as that gets cleaned up, then I think that they could win by 10 or so.
I'm gonna go with Iowa too. I think Floyd's coming home. After looking at everything, I do think Iowa. Looking at the schedules, have played. I shouldn't say like super tougher opponents, but I think Iowa State is better than UNC. That stuff right there, and I don't know about this Minnesota team. I kind of came in thinking that they were going to be a bottom half of the Big Ten. Still yet to be. They haven't played anyone of note outside of the UNC game. But when I am confident about Iowa winning, that's when they usually lose, so just watch out for that. But I'm still going to go with Iowa -2.5.
This game, as we've seen a couple times, could come down to what I believe are two of the best kickers in the Big Ten, in Drew Stevens and Dragan Kasic, who was the Big Ten Kicker of the Year last year. Had a couple misses against North Carolina that cost the Gophers. Drew Stevens has been fantastic so far this year. Hasn't been asked to do a ton, but hasn't missed a field goal, hasn't missed an extra point. I wouldn't be shocked if this comes down to a tie game in the fourth quarter and one of these two getting a shot. I will take Iowa to cover. I also wouldn't be shocked to see a big special teams play. We've seen KGAN get real close. Minnesota's got a new punt returner. They've got a true freshman back there now. You wonder if a muff, something like that. Boy, we saw KGAN almost missed one against Troy. You wonder if special teams ends up deciding this, as we focus so much on what Iowa's defense is doing, and can Iowa's offense, really get things going in both phases there. Wouldn't be shocked if we see something in special teams really decide the fate of how Floyd goes in 2024.
That might be a conversation for another day, though. Iowa's special teams haven't been 100% this year.
I feel like we've talked quite a bit about that.
That's a good point. Yeah, we have talked about punting.
Bring it up every week.
I don't think we mentioned the muff on Monday, which I kind of forgot about because Nestor jumped on that.
Brought that up, and I mean that was 17-14 game, and
he's usually sure-handed, and I do like.
He had the one against Illinois go over his head, because I remember I think I told you on the field at Kinnick before. I was like, I wouldn't be shocked if KGAN, because everyone was wondering Cooper's missing from the DB side, but he's a punt returner, and I was like, I bet KGAN does something today. People aren't really talking about that. And then he had one go over his head, and then I think that was the one that, he just kind of misjudged. You're like, oh, no. But obviously redeemed himself and set up Caleb Johnson's touchdown. But, either side, whether it's, I really want Reese to be the top-end Reese we've seen in this one and really give Iowa the edge in field position, because it will come down to that, I think, in one way or another, against these two teams that want to win that trench battle so badly.
Just such an interesting going back to the time of year that it's being played, is just such a different Iowa-Minnesota game than we've seen in the past. Because every game, even if it's not -1, it's still brisk. It's still a game where you bring a blanket, bring some hot cocoa, bring some tortilla chips, maybe even. If not, it's an indoors game at the Triple H Metrodome. So having this game in mid-September, when it's going to be, we'll be in the 70s, 80s. That's just
82 is the high. PM showers, it says.
I thought the high there was way lower than that.
You're not looking at the Iowa forecast, right?
No, Minneapolis. It was in Minneapolis.
I'm using the Iowa's News and Other Weather app, which is a free download in your Apple or Android store. I'm going to check that out quick too. Yeah, I thought I saw earlier this week.
Showers in the evenings, though.
It said showers, but I thought it said the high was going to be 72.
This says 82, but the sun sets at 7, so it's not going to be that hot during the game. Yeah. Game starts at 6:30. So
our point is, it's going to be more comfortable than it was 2 years ago. I think that's really what we're getting at. This is not going to have a wind chill of -1. All right. Well, we will not bundle up, and of course, if you are heading north, we'd love to hear from you. If you want to tag us on Twitter, Eye on the Hawks, or put a comment in the YouTube channel, and we'll keep an eye out for everybody, and we'll see what happens in 2024, the 118th meeting between Iowa and Minnesota, as we get ready for the Battle of the Floyd of Rosedale. We'll be back here Monday to recap everything. For Mike and Owen, I'm Mitch. We'll see you on Monday for the next edition of Eye on the Hawks.